Okay, let's get right into this. I want you to picture the scene. It's the day before Thanksgiving, 1971. A rainy, kind of gloomy afternoon at Portland International Airport. A man who looks like any other businessman, dark suit, tie, the whole deal, walks up to the airline counter. He pays cash for a one-way ticket to Seattle and just quietly gets on the plane. No one knows it yet, but he's about to become an American legend.
Not long after takeoff, this man, who called himself Dan Cooper, very calmly hands a note to a flight attendant. She kind of tucks it in her pocket, thinking it's a phone number or something, but he just leans in and says these words, so polite, but so chilling. Right there, the hijacking began, and with it, one of the greatest unsolved mysteries we've ever seen.
And that's the big question, isn't it? The one that's driven the FBI and countless amateur detectives crazy for over half a century. How did one guy with a bomb in a briefcase just disappear from a moving airplane and completely get away with it? It's a story that didn't just create a folk hero. It totally changed how we fly, forever. So let's break down exactly how he did it.
To really get the mystery, you have to start at the very beginning, with the man himself. And the thing is, there was no man. He was a complete ghost, an absolute nobody who just walked out of the rain and right into the history books.
You know, what's so wild is just how incredibly normal he seemed. Nobody gave this guy a second look. Eyewitnesses described him as quiet, polite, totally calm. He was just another face in the crowd, which, when you think about it, was the perfect disguise for what he was about to do.
Everything he did was so methodical. He paid for his ticket, a whopping $20 in cash. He sat in the back of the plane. He even ordered a bourbon and soda and paid for it before the plane took off. Each little step was so mundane, so deliberately normal, all designed to fly under the radar while this audacious plan was about to unfold.
All right, so he's settled in, drink in hand, and that's when the quiet businessman reveals he has a very, very detailed and kind of bizarre plan.
This is what was on that note, written out in all caps with a felt-tip pen. It was firm, direct, there was no messing around. When the flight attendant, a woman named Florence Schaffner, did what he said, he proved he wasn't bluffing.
He calmly opened his briefcase, just enough for her to get a quick look inside. And what she saw looked completely real. 8 red sticks that looked like dynamite, a mess of wires, and a big battery. From that moment on, there was no doubt who was in control of that plane.
Now, this is where you start to see how much thought he put into this. His demands were so specific, not just money, but exactly $200,000 in unmarked $20 bills. Not just one parachute, but 4 of them. And he knew he'd need a fuel truck standing by in Seattle. This was no impulse crime. This thing was planned down to the last detail.
So, the plane lands in Seattle. He gets his money and parachutes, and he lets all 36 passengers go. You'd think it's over, right? Nope, not even close. The most incredible part of his plan was just getting started.
He tells the remaining crew to take off again, but he gives them these really weird flight instructions. Now, to you and me, this might seem random, but to a pilot, it's clear what he's doing. These settings force a huge Boeing 727 to fly as slow and as low as it possibly can. He was turning a commercial jet into the perfect getaway vehicle for a skydiver.
Cooper told the last flight attendant to go to the cockpit and stay there. A little while later, a warning light blinked on in the cockpit. He'd done it. He had lowered the rear staircase of the plane while they were flying through a storm.
He was getting ready to jump into total darkness in the middle of a storm from 10,000 feet. For perspective, that's nearly 2 miles up, way higher than a typical recreational jump. And get this, he was doing it in freezing rain, wearing nothing more than a business suit and a trench coat. The wind chill at that altitude would have been a mind-numbing 70 degrees below zero. Just surviving that seems almost impossible.
The pilots felt a small change in air pressure, a little upward bump in the tail of the plane. And that was it. Dan Cooper, the money, and 2 of the parachutes had stepped out into the night over the rugged wilderness of the Pacific Northwest. He was gone.
When the plane finally landed, authorities swarmed it, ready for a standoff, but there was no one to arrest. This kicked off one of the biggest and most frustrating manhunts in the history of the FBI. The investigation got a code name Norjak. The FBI threw everything they had at it. They combed the forests, they dragged lakes, they interviewed thousands of people. The result? Absolutely nothing. No man, no parachute, no money.
It was literally as if he just evaporated into thin air.
For 9 years, that's where the story ended. The case went completely cold. The legend of D.B. Cooper just grew and grew, but there was zero evidence. And then, in 1980, a little bit of luck blew the whole case wide open again.
A young boy was digging a spot for a bonfire on the bank of the Columbia River, and he found these 3 decaying bundles of cash. They ran the serial numbers, and bingo, a perfect match to the ransom money. But instead of solving the mystery, this just made it deeper. This was only about $6 grand. Where was the other $194,000?
With so few clues to work with, the investigation had to shift. If they couldn't find the evidence, maybe they could find the man. The FBI started compiling a list of guys who could potentially be Cooper, but none of them ever seemed to be a perfect fit.
I mean, some of these suspects looked really good on paper. There was Richard McCoy, who pulled off an almost identical copycat hijacking just a few months later. There was Robert Rackstraw, a former special ops pilot, who kind of hinted to people that he was the guy, but every single time the FBI hit a brick wall, a solid alibi, DNA that didn't match, or just no hard evidence to tie them to the crime. The ghost stayed a ghost.
And so, in 2016, after 45 years, the FBI officially suspended the active investigation. The trail was cold for good. But it's that very fact that he completely and utterly disappeared that has captured our imagination for so long, turning this criminal into a kind of folk hero, a symbol of one man against the system.
When you strip everything else away, you're really left with just 2 possibilities. On one hand, you have the criminal mastermind who pulled off the perfect crime. He landed safely, stashed the cash, and just faded back into a normal life. On the other hand, you have a guy who was in way over his head, who died the second he hit the unforgiving wilderness.
And in the end, that's the question we're all left with. Was D.B. Cooper this brilliant anti-hero who beat the system and got away with it, or was he a reckless amateur whose luck ran out the moment he stepped off that plane? The truth is, probably scattered out there in the wind somewhere over the Pacific Northwest. And you know what? Maybe that's exactly how he would have wanted it.